It was a pleasure meeting you up there in Montreal, and just overwhelmed with your tremendous success. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your story.
Yeah, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago. I
Okay.
am very proud of my age of 47. Grew up in a very multicultural island, and mom's Black, dad's Chinese. So grew up with many sort of influences around us, but moved to the States when I was 10, immigrated here when I was 10. And I had said that was probably the first time I ever felt the notion of race. Um, my mom went to register myself and my sister in elementary school, and there there's one question with three boxes. What are your kids? What race is your kids? Black, white, or other? And my mom went to the registrar and made a complete scene of everything and was like, my kids are not black, they're not white, and they're definitely not other. And that's something that we never faced growing up in the Caribbean, right? Like very such a melting pot of cultures. And so she made a big scene. She's like, I refuse to answer this question. I'm leaving it blank. So she left it blank. And needless to say, when I was applying for colleges, unbeknownst to me, I was white. And so I had to go back and at that point change it all and put other. And I think this is maybe like 30 years ago. So I think maybe at that point they had put the little line and you can fill it in. But growing up, to me, I have to say that's one of the formative experiences I think of who I am as a person. What really stands out to me when I care for is just that story of just the complete juxtaposition of living this island where, we had neighbors and my parents' friends were like black, white, Indian, Chinese, French Creole, like you name it, we were all there. And so
Yeah.
it just, I think if you had to ask me a formidable sort of point in my life, that's just one of those stories that I can't even tell you what I ate for dinner yesterday, but I remember that situation crystal clear in my head.
Yeah.
Because my
And
mom was so adamant about it.
when you moved, where did you move to, Carrie?
Miami, Florida.
So tell me a bit about your parents. So you said your dad is black. He was from Trinidad,
My
Tobago.
mom's black,
Mom's
dad's
black, and your father's Chinese.
Chinese, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So how did they meet?
At an engagement party. Again, like, you know, um, yeah, engagement party. But again, like my grandfather, my dad's dad, was actually an indentured servant when they had abolished slavery in Trinidad, right? So when you talk about, who your childhood, I think your childhood actually is a precursor to who you are and what you're going to be when you grow up. So what I mean by that is my grandfather arrived in Trinidad with like a dime and went and worked in the fields, saved his money, and then he went and bought an orange grove. Then he saved his money in that, and then he went and bought. And when you go up on islands, little bodegas in the street. Then he went and built one of those in a very less popular part of the island. So the traffic there was huge because he's one of like a couple. Took that money and then parlayed it into building the biggest gravel sourcing company on the island. So I tell a lot of people that story because I think my future entrepreneurship was charted even before I knew myself. But I think that story just really resonates with me that, with hard work and really perseverance, you can build great things. I mean, you can build great things. I don't know what the low points were because I only hear the good points in the recounting of the stories, but I have to say, I mean, he didn't speak, even when I knew him as my grandfather, he didn't speak really good English, right? And so you watch that on my mom's side. The folk tale is that, my great great grandfather was a white landowner, and as things happen in every slavery type, he hooked up with a slave. I don't want to use the R word, and then that's my lineage, right? So again, so you really look at just this melting pot of like how, like, once slavery was abolished and people from different cultures were sort of like literally shipped in, that's how I am who I am. That's where my multiculturalism comes in. So
That's that's great. Yeah. So from your grandfather, even though you said he didn't speak a lot of English or English well, what did you sort of glean from him? I mean, obviously the hard work, but Was there anything that, other than that, obviously, which is very important, that you sort of learned from him?
I mean, I would say this, right? Like I tell the story, and as someone who's probably running a company, he made a lot of like, I would say again, very, very trade oriented, but made a lot of pivots, right? Like as he saw like ideas come up, he invested in it, made his money, and then he saw another idea pop up or another white space, did that. And then again, like I don't know how you go from owning a shop to owning the biggest gravel
Yeah.
company on the island, but he clearly saw, I mean, if I had to think, he clearly saw probably a lot of dollars coming in the country and was like, people are probably gonna start building homes and businesses. So I think the thing I've gained from him or just when I hear the stories is the fact that, every time he kept on seeing a white space, he kept on sort of like going and capturing that opportunity. So I would say that and the perseverance and just the spirit, because I'm sure there were many days he wanted to give up, and but he didn't. And he had 6 kids and he fed them all.
That's great. And did your father sort of follow suit? Did he inherit any of your grandfather's businesses and take them over, Carrie?
He did for a little bit, and then when you have 6 kids, there's always some drama involved. And my dad is the type of guy that he's drama free, and he has this philosophy that no amount of money could really, give you what you're really looking for. And so he just walked off the family business and was like, "You guys figure it out." And so, and then we moved to the States at that point. So I think the hard part for me when I tell that part of the story is that the fact that, family dynamics in a business setting is sometimes very, very rough. Needless to say, 67 years later, as they're all sort of hitting that last chapter of their life, they've all sort of made back up and have become siblings again. There's a chunk of 40 years missing in between, but yeah, he did go and help for a very long time before he moved to the States.
Okay. And so what, well, before that, you talked about Trinidad and Tobago sort of being a melting pot and, different cultures and races all together. And for those 10 years, would you describe them as very joyous years?
Yeah, I mean, again, like the things that I look at that we mildly obsess on in the States is you just don't have that, I guess, luxury in on an island, right? Like you're yeah, we just played with everything. I have to be really serious. I did not know that there was such a notion that like, people were judged by what they look like on the outside until I moved to the US.
Yeah. All right. So what made your parents decide to move to Miami?
Part of it was just, sort of looking for a better life. God has a funny way sometimes of writing your journey for you and you don't even realize as it's written, right? So a year after we moved to the US, I actually had the early signs of my dystonia, my disability come up. And luckily we were in the States, and luckily my parents had money to be able to take me to the doctor. But I often think that if we were still living in that country, the one thing, the drawback on island communities is that, they take what they call, like broken people and put them in a home and wouldn't have gotten the care we needed. So, I think there was a reason why I moved when we moved, because literally the year after I got sick and, luck was able to get diagnosed 2 years after.
Yeah. And so tell me about your disease, Carrie.
Yeah, it's called dystonia. It's neurological, so it starts off in my brain. The way it manifested when I was 12, 11, I had a hard time walking on one foot. For about 5 to 6 weeks, I was able to fool my parents and say, you know what, like I twisted my ankle, but it never really dawned on them anything was wrong, because I was always like a nerd. I love to read. I was lazy. I never went out for walks. And so I just feel like, oh, she's just being lazy, right? And so, but after a while, they're like, Carrie, like this has been a long sprain. And then I went to the doctor, and I was in and out of doctors for probably a year before I was diagnosed. And I've always been stubborn with my disease. When when I was 12 or 13, they tried to give me medication, and I said, I'm not taking that. That makes me nauseous. Um, and and yeah, and then I kind of went through life with it. It progressed over time. Um, but again, like I think that life lesson, as hard as sometimes it is that, you can carry strong things sometimes. You can get through like hard times. And so my sister also has a disease. She and I both had brain surgery. She's not as lucky as me. I can run, I can walk, I can speak now. But she unfortunately still has to be in a wheelchair. So the dystonia, what it does is attacks your legs, your arms. For people, it's a speech. And so it's a genetic flaw. And luckily with science, 16 years ago, I I had brain surgery. So I got wires in my head, I've got a battery in my chest. And so your brain is not that smart. What it does is it just replicates the signal that keeps on going to my bad part of my brain. And that facilitates me being able to walk and speak and write and be able to talk to you today, Adam.
Wow. Okay. So when you guys moved to Miami, so who comes to Miami, Carrie? How many of you?
All of us, mom, dad, sister, everyone.
Okay. And you have how many siblings?
One.
Just okay, one. Okay. So the four of you come to Miami.
Hmm.
Okay. And do you know why your parents chose Miami?
We used to go there a lot for vacation. It's highly Caribbean oriented. My dad had lived in New York when he was younger, and he
Okay.
swore he would never go back to that city again. Needless to say, I ended up going there right after college. Um, One of my favorite cities ever. And and yeah, and so they knew people there. And again, like you always want to go where your tribe is. They knew people there, they have friends there. And so we just landed in Miami.
Okay. And you stayed in Miami until you graduated high school? Okay.
Until I graduated high school, I swore I'd never go back. Which is kind of funny because I live there now. So
So tell me then, you talked about sort of almost like a utopia in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of race and race relations. So you come to Miami, you get diagnosed, you're sick. Tell me what sort of high school was like for you, Carrie.
um high school was fine. I've always been very driven. And so I knew that I want to go to a good college. I knew I had to study hard. I knew I had to try and hopefully get some scholarships. But high school was, it was fine. It was not like, the best part of my life. Like we didn't grow up rich. There's a lot of things I couldn't afford to do. So um I don't know, like I never actually really reflected on high school, Adam, but
Okay.
it was fine, neither here nor there. Not a very pinnacle piece of my career or in my life, I would say.
Okay. And in terms of race, were there issues in terms of that?
No, I kind of like, because I was so driven, really want to go to college. I kind of was like, go to school, come back, study. I really was driven to graduate in the top 5 people in my class. It was a goal I set out, so really focused on that. But high schoolers do they're fractions, right? So I think as I reflect on it, did I have like a strong tribe in high school? No, but I was really focused on what I wanted to get out of high school, which was going to a good college. So I was more focused on that.
Okay. And in terms of college, had there been other members of the family who had gone to college, Carrie?
I had a cousin that went to college, but for the most part, no one had really gone. Like I went to school in Chapel Hill, to UNC Chapel Hill, so no one had really gone to, I would say, a big US university like that in my family.
Okay. And do you remember when sort of college sort of came on your radar that you knew that you wanted to do that since no one in the family, direct family, had done that?
Adam, I'm really weird in that regard. I've always known what I want to do for some respects. I don't know how I got these things, ideas into my head, but I had always wanted to go to Harvard Business School. I'd always wanted to be a CEO. I had told my mom when I was very little I couldn't get married until a certain age. I couldn't have kids. Needless to say, none of that's happened, but yeah. But I was always very much goal oriented in how I thought about. So for me, I think going to college was something that I knew I had to do. I knew I wanted to do, and I also feel like the drive for me to work that much harder was I knew how hard it was for my parents to live in a foreign country, that they chose to give my sister and I a better life. And so um, part of my drive was to get into a good college, was just to make them proud.
Okay. And was UNC, was that your only choice where you wanted to go? Were
I
there
was
others?
in UNC, UVA, and University of Miami. I ultimately chose UNC, but I can tell you I did not have a very good college experience at in UNC.
And why was that, Carrie?
So UNC is a big state school, right? Honestly, maybe my naive non-American way didn't realize the really big separation between the North and the South.
Okay.
And there were a lot of people in North Carolina that grew up in small towns, right? Like they had one traffic light, and and so I had a lot of issues with race and in UNC Chapel Hill. I would say, the African American, the Black people didn't necessarily accept me because I didn't look Black, and
Mhm.
the white people thought I was funny looking, different. And so when they'd ask me like, well, what are you? And I explained my race. I remember this one guy in my dorm room said to me like, well, why would a Chinese man marry a Black woman? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't understand that question. Or another person on my floor who had a Confederate flag up, that was my naivety. I didn't realize there was such a big divide between the North and the South. Because remember, left Trinidad, go to Miami, very insular. Like, we hung out with all West Indian people, Jamaicans, Trinis, whomever. And then for the first time, I'm really outside that bubble. And people are quite blunt in the South, right? Like, what are you? Who are you? And I'm like, what do you mean, what am I? I'm human. And they couldn't figure it out why I didn't look Black or white. And that really that drove me to actually graduate school early. So I graduated in 3.5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That even though you can be on a college campus, you can only rely on your own experiences, right? So sort of if you come from a small town and you haven't been exposed to very much, even though you're on a college campus, that all that baggage or all that history comes with you as you go to college. And hopefully, as you spend your 4 years there, you grow. You certainly hope so. Being exposed to other people. But that's interesting. I mean, did you ever think about transferring?
No, I just felt like, I had gotten enough credits to begin with to almost graduate in 3.5 years. And I just, I don't know, I worked so hard to get in there. I was like, I'll just finish it. And I just never even thought, it never even dawned on me to think about that, Adam. So, yeah, just finished up, left. And ironically, I ended up getting a summer internship before I graduated with SEO. And so Sponsors for Educational Opportunities, they put people of color on Wall Street. And so again, like that one internship changed my entire life, right? Like, never thought about this thing called Wall Street. Never thought I still didn't know how to explain to my parents what I did. So they assumed I was a broker all summer. Um, and then when I came back, I was just exposed to this whole world. Like, I came from a culture where you're a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. And so when I went on Wall Street, I saw these big buildings in New York and thought about, all these fancy like cocktail receptions these banks were throwing us. Um, I was like, this is a place I have to be. And so lined up a job at investment banking the summer after graduation. And so I spent that whole 6 months when I was time off, I spent working to save money for college.
So what firm did you work for?
It no longer exists, but Bear Stearns.
Oh, okay. One of my classmates founded Bear Stearns.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know that they were a small company, but very, very, very successful.
Mhm.
That's terrific. Because I actually spent a number of years working at Merrill Lynch, so I understand the experience.
There you go.
All right, so you saying the internship was right before college?
No, the internship was my last year before my senior year of
Okay,
college.
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
So prior to that, what were you sort of thinking in terms of your career path? What were you sort of thinking at that time prior to the internship, Carrie?
Accounting.
Counting, okay.
Three choices.
Accounting. All right. So the internship really did change your trajectory. I mean, that's yeah. And what did you find compelling about working at Bear Stearns and working on Wall Street?
So the reason why I liked Bear Stearns was just it seemed a bit scrappy, right? It was scrappy, it was less pretentious than some of the other banks are and were. I liked that they sort of like, I mean, this is back in the day, so it was intentional cherry picking. I like that they had someone who was running the recruiting that was really trying to make a push in diversity. And so I like that. And so for me, like it was just a culture I felt like I can fit into because I mean, thing with Bear is like there's not like there's there's a lot of golden children, but there's also just a lot of hustlers, right? So I felt like that was a culture of someone who would need to learn like, you know, the difference between what again, like I remember my first cocktail reception at Bear Stearns. They were like, "What kind of wine do you want?" And I was like, "What are my choices, red or white?" Right? So I didn't even know there was like double clicks on red and white, right? So it just I felt like at Bear being a fish out of water, I would be able to at least navigate a little bit and not seem as awkward versus some of the other banks where I felt like, you know, 90% of the classes were filled with legacies or like, you know, friends of family who all went to very upper echelon type schools. And so I just felt like Bear, I can fit in and learn from people at that company.
Okay. No, well, thank you for sharing that. So after the internship, you graduate, and then do you go back to Bear Stearns?
I graduate and I work for a little bit. The hustle is real. I work for a little bit. I um I saved some money because the deal with my parents again like was like, you're gonna go to New York, you gotta pay for your own way to go to New York. Well, we'll buy you the plane ticket as your graduation gift, but you gotta figure out how to get your down payment on your apartment. So I actually went to work as a substitute teacher in the public school system for 6 months and saved my money and then, you know, went to New York to start off a career on Wall Street. But you know, I've always been able to figure out the hustle like that.
And you went back to Bear Stearns, Carrie?
Mhm.
Okay.
I did my internship actually at him at Merrill Lynch,
Okay. All right.
but I went to Brisbane's to start my analyst program. I
Okay.
ended up being there for 5 years.
Okay. And at this stage, Carrie, where are you in terms of your disease, in terms of its management?
At that point, it had gotten into both legs. I had a great team um, at Mount Sinai in New York, and again, like you're an analyst, you're not eating right, you're barely sleeping. I used to sleep under my desk, and so the disease did progress quite quickly to both legs, and but you know, I've always been surrounded by really good people, and so that no one ever brought it up, no one ever like complained about walking slow with me, and so again, like I think the only person that really felt it was me. But most people, you know, pretended like not pretended, but just never made it a big deal.
Okay. So going back for a second, Carrie, in terms of you talked about your grandfather, your parents, a little bit, and I just want to sort of reflect. What are the main things when you, in retrospect, that you feel you learned from your parents, and were there any other mentors or champions up until through high school, college, that you sort of remember, Carrie?
Well, I think for my parents, one of the things, you know, has always just been um, working hard pays off. One of the things I've always said to my dad is like, because I love to leave jobs if I'm not happy. My dad was like, I don't have that luxury. I've got 4 mouths to feed. And so, some of that immigrant mentality, I think, has really resonated with me as a leader right now, because sometimes you just have to realize, like, you buckle down and you figure it out, right? In terms of other mentors, I would say honestly, I don't think I had any, which is bad. Like, I always think I've been so driven, and I don't really understand why as I look back. I mean, as I got older, I started to get, like, more people I look up to, but I just don't think I had anyone that I truly
Okay.
looked up to at that age.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So you spent 5 years at Bear Stearns, and my obvious question is, why did you leave? I mean, and was there ever a point where you thought this was going to be, where you'd spend the rest of your life?
No. On my life plan, I had always wanted to go to Harvard Business School. Did not work out that way. I actually went to Stanford.
Okay.
And the funny story about that is, again, my parents are very Caribbean. And so when you're from the Caribbean, there's only one school in this entire world, and it's called Harvard, right? And so I remember when I got in, I was like, hey, like, I was so excited because I got into Stanford, and my dad was like, well, why not Harvard? And I was like, Daddy, why don't you go and this was back in the day with Netscape, right? We didn't even have Google back then. I was like, Dad, why don't you go and, like, look up what Stanford is and who Stanford is. And after he came back, he's like, okay, I'm so proud of you, right? So I think for me, I had always wanted to go to business school. I'd always thought is that I think growing up, I'd always seen, like, the Jack Welches and all those people. And because at that point, Adam, like, if you think about it, those were the only people I could look up to, right? There was no woman running Fortune 500 companies. There were no women writing books, much less any person of color, right? And so I just remember, like, that's where, Jack Welch went, whichever business book, like, I was reading. And so I had always felt this strong pull that I had to go to business school to be successful. And so when I got into Stanford, it was quite the opposite experience of my undergrad, where I really loved my Stanford experience.
Okay. And what was sort of if there was, what was the turning point in terms of leaving Bear Stearns?
It was time. 5 years was enough. It was just time. I was getting tired, and it was never going to be my lifelong career. And I just felt like at 27 years old, it was time to go to business school.
Okay. So you got into Stanford, and I'm just out of curiosity, you talk about Jack Welch, but what was compelling about Stanford versus some of these other schools?
The weather. I hated
New York.
I love New York. I hate winter.
Yes.
At that point, if you think about it, right, we're talking about 2002. The tech world was starting to become up and coming. Google was, like, right down the street. I don't know, I just felt like a gravitational pull towards it. The class was smaller, and that was really intentional because, Harvard was a bigger class, Wharton was a bigger class. Our class was 350 people. And that was really important to me because I had gone to undergrad. It had been, like, this big public university. And it really meant a lot to me to go to a smaller school. And part of my goal was to meet everyone. And that was part of my investment in myself in business school. And so I had said I was going to have lunch with everyone in my class. I think I got to, like, 90% of the class. But that really afforded me what I was seeking for in business school, right? That notion of understanding people, understanding cultures, because one thing I felt at that point, everyone's life, 90% of people were open to talk about it, right? So I never met a Mormon before. And so I, like, had lunch with one, like, tell me about your culture, because it is a culture, right? Like, tell me about, like, or I had spent some time with international kids, right? Like, tell me about why you wanted to come here and how is it going to help you? Or, I had wanted to spend time with sort of, like, the BBSA, like, to understand, like, where can I help out? Where can I be part of this community, as a smart community, right? So it just was a no-brainer for me on why I went to Stanford. I had this gut pull. That being said, I did have some low points. The low points were everyone's incredibly intelligent there. So you went from being the top of your game to being one of like 300 like people. And it was humbling, right? Like it was super humbling, but I enjoyed my Stanford experience. I think it is beyond one of the best investments I've made in myself, and really made such a great network of people in that community.
Yeah. And when you attended at 27, was that sort of a typical age, or were you a little older, a little younger?
No, that was typical. It was
Okay.
typical.
Okay. So at Stanford, what are you thinking then? Because the program is it 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you thinking? You go to Stanford, you've been on Wall Street, what's Carrie thinking when she enters Stanford that, once she graduates, where do you want to go? And does that change?
So no, I'd always said part of the reason why I wanted to go to Stanford was to transition off to more an operational role. So when I was at Stanford, I did focus a lot of taking classes on leadership, um, you know, how to communicate with people, how to path to power. So I took a lot of leadership classes because that's
Mhm.
where, you know, all of us worked before, well, 90% of us worked before business school, right? So you get there and you kind of I would see the flaws in leadership for me and like, or how people talked. And so I spoke to communicate with others. So for me, beyond my core curriculum, I spent a lot of time taking those types of classes because I just knew deep down, like to be a good operational leader, you have to be able to communicate and rally a team around you.
Yeah. So you're at Stanford, what, basically 2000?
2002, 2004.
Okay. The, because you alluded to this a few minutes ago, the role of women at that time, and now at Stanford, what percentage were women? Do you recall, Carrie?
No, but I think it was fairly, I feel like it was fairly maybe 40-60, if not 50-50. It wasn't like,
Okay.
it wasn't, I mean, they do a great job at trying to get like, different diverse backgrounds in and I don't think the essays changed, but the essay back in the last couple of years is what matters most to you and why, right? And you can tell a lot about a person, the way they answer a question, the way they think about it, the way they talk about what matters most to them, right? So I think that brings a rich diversity in the class and super appreciative of that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So tell me one or two of the real great highlights of Stanford.
Again, like you meet a fantastic group of people that, I've stayed in touch with a lot of my friends. That's number one. Number two, you get to go, if you take a lot of loans like I did, you get to do a lot of different experiences. So, went to South Africa, with some, so again, doing those global type of trips were fascinating. Um, and then, really it just comes back to the people. I mean, that to me is just the foundation of why I went there. Um, and they've been lifelong friends.
That's great. So just briefly, tell me about South Africa.
You know, went, saw Robin's Island, just experienced something different that I'd never experienced before. And you go with a very mixed group of people, income, race, whatever. And there was a little bit of tension, when you go through Soweto and those types, and people are like, I don't think people thought those types of neighborhoods are like, shanty towns are real, and you go and you see their faces, right? And like, and they don't really understand, I think sometimes like why things happen the way it happened, right? And so again, like for me, and these are good friends of mine, right? Like what I, by the time I got to Stanford, what I realized is that we all have different experiences, and sometimes people just don't know any different. They're not trying to be malicious. They're not trying to have malintent. They're just asking questions. I might come off as ignorant sometimes, um, but again, like I think part of what I've learned is education is important, and don't dismiss don't assume everyone's is as woke as you are sometimes.
Okay. Thank you. So you graduate Stanford. What do you do next, Carrie?
I graduated Stanford. I go work at American Express. I find my disease at that point. really becoming debilitating, I then build a spreadsheet. I then write pros and cons of brain surgery. The pros are I'd walk. The cons are I might end up being in a wheelchair, and status goes I might end up being in a wheelchair. And so I decided to have brain surgery my second year of AMX. And then and then took 6 weeks to feel better and went back to work. But the thing about when I had surgery though is I made, after 7 hours of having your brain open, you start making deals with God, the universe, whoever you look up to. And I just remember telling God, like, if I can survive this, there's two things I want to do. Number one is I want to run a 10K. And the second thing is I will dedicate myself to health and wellness. And so needless to say, in the 16 years after, I've run 13 half marathons, 2 full marathons. And after I very soon left Amex after, went to work for a bunch of fitness companies, very health focused companies, was lastly in a job in Toronto. And when I was in Toronto, I ran the 2018 New York City Marathon. And when I ran the marathon, as fate would have it, I ran the course right in front of the hospital I had my brain surgery in. And I saw this apparition of myself like being wheeled out with my mom wheeling me out, and I'm bald head with these 2 bandages on my head. And it took my breath away. Like I literally like fell, and I was like, I'm not doing my purpose. Like I just felt like this pull, like you're not doing what you're meant to be. And so I went back to Canada, quit my job, and lo and behold, I ended up finding an opportunity to be CEO of the company I'm at today. And so I think sometimes life gives you like little signs and hints. I'm obviously, it's been a journey, Adam. So I'm not meaning to tell us all like, been fun and games. Like, I've had multiple batteries in my chest malfunction. I've had, ups and downs in life. But, at the end of the day, like, I do feel truly blessed that there's a science that's enabled me to walk and to run and to lead. And as I think about it a lot, I think, I was given this disease because it gives me balance. And what I mean by that is I'm in bed by 9 p.m. Like, my brain is exhausted by 5. I don't do good work, so maybe I push it to 6 or 7 at night, and then I just have to go to bed. It just, my brain just is physically tired, and I sleep 8 hours a night. And so I tell myself, like, if I didn't have to do it, because I really do have to do it, I probably would be a different CEO, burnt out, stressed, more than I am, I would say today, and just like really like, unhealthy, right? So I do think sometimes that I was given this disease to really have some balance in my life, because I tend to go overboard sometimes, but I can, because I do have to take care of myself.
Yeah. So when you had the surgery, tell me, you talked about your mother wheeling you out, but in terms of your parents and their thoughts on, whether you should go through this, how did that sort of work, Carrie?
It was hard because my sister actually had the same surgery right when it was going through FDA approval, and she ended up having to have like 2 or 3 brain surgeries. And so I just saw what that did to them. And so when I ended up doing it, doctors had been begging me to do it for like 3 or 4 years. I was like, nope, not gonna do it. That's but too much. It puts a lot of tension on parents, right? Like I surprised my parents. I mean, again, they must love each other a lot, even though they bicker, but they stuck through it. To have 2 disabled kids is a hell of a job, right? And so when I decided I was going to do it, I didn't tell my dad until 2 nights before. And my mom came up and stood in my little studio with me. The one thing I will say about that time in my life, coming back to Stanford, is Google Sheets or Google had just come out, and my classmates that were in New York literally sent around a spreadsheet of who would come and take care of me to give my mom a break, right? So you talk about why, and I tell you that because that's why Stanford the people hold such a significant place in my heart because no one had to do that, right? Like they would come, they would sit with me, give my mom some to go out and grab groceries, fresh air, whatever it is. But it did put a lot of strain. My mom had to obviously, I think she probably took FMLA, came and lived in my little tiny studio apartment, made sure I was going to the doctor and stuff. But ultimately, they were supportive. I think my dad got over it once I got out of the OR. But
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think they knew how much physical pain I was in. I just didn't really have a choice.
Yeah. Well, no, you talk about your parents, my gosh, having two children who both have a disease that is so debilitating and devastating. My goodness, that's quite a testament to the two of them. That's really quite remarkable. Really quite remarkable. So tell me now. All right. So you transitioned. So tell me about where you are now, and tell me about how you said you sort of transitioned into being CEO. How did that come about, Carrie?
So I was looking for something different. Like I said, I left Canada. I was looking for really a truly operational role. Looking, right place, right times, opportunity had come up, and to be chief executive officer. And at that point, I was reading Carol Dweck's mindset book, and she said the only way you can grow is if you challenge yourself and get uncomfortable. And as I had gotten older, the CEO notion was kind of like, do I want to? Do I not want to? I've talked to investors and stuff like that. And then so when the opportunity came up, I reflected and I was like, Carrie, the only way you're going to grow is if you get uncomfortable, and this job will make you uncomfortable. And it has made me so uncomfortable. And it's a tough job. I think, no one really, people think CEOs drink martinis and, probably, have long lunches, but the reality is, especially, in the last, since I've been CEO in a very hard 2.5 years. I took over as CEO February 24th, 2020. I walked into a pandemic. I walked into a company that had to be cleaned up a little bit, and so I cleaned that up. And then now with the financial crisis, it's a whole other thing too, right? So, and then you put Roe v. Wade on it 2 weeks ago. It's just it's been a very, very tumultuous 2 years. And again, like I appreciate where I am and what I do, because especially now more than ever, and before I say what I say, I want to acknowledge that there are people with differing views on this topic, but watching Roe v. Wade get overturned as a CEO of a women's health company was tough, right? Like we got so many questions from patients being so concerned. Can we ship to their state? Can we not ship to their state? They're panicking. And now more than ever, companies like myself at SimpleHealth need to be around to support people who need us.
Yeah. All right. So tell me, Carrie, explain to me what your company does.
Yeah, so the company, Adam, is called SimpleHealth. We do we're telehealth and telepharmacy. So you go online, you type in simplehealth.com, you fill out a consultation. The consultation is reviewed by a doctor. The doctor will prescribe medicine based on your factors. We'll send you back a message and say, hey, do you approve it? People are like, yes, go ahead and ship it. And so from the minute you fill out the form to the time you get your medication could be anywhere from 4 to 7 days.
Okay.
And it's been incredibly interesting and rewarding for me personally, because every new patient gets an email from me where it says, welcome, I'm a Black Chinese disabled CEO. And people actually respond to those emails, right? They are like, thank you so much for the service. As an African-American woman, I felt so discriminated and judged at times. I'm overweight. And, I feel like, your platform is non-judgmental. You just really want to help me get good healthcare. Those are the types of things that make me really want to work harder at them, because that's really what we're trying to do, is to get people the proper healthcare we need. So that's today. I'm trying to raise capital right now. We want to go into other life stages, just beyond birth control, but fertility, perimenopause, menopause. And so that's what we're on the trajectory to build. And it's been a grind. I don't need to repeat the statistics to you, but raising capital as a person of color is incredibly difficult, and raising capital as a person of color who's also a woman is incredibly difficult, right? And so there are days where, like, you met me at WPO. Those are fantastic women, and we're all very celebratory. But the grind it's real. Like, I'll speak for myself. I feel sometimes I'm at such a disadvantage because of my race, because of my gender, and it's a grind raising money sometimes.
Yeah. And in terms of, with your experience on Wall Street, there at Stanford, in terms of trying to navigate that path, Carrie, I guess, going in front of bankers and how that process works, how do you sort of navigate that? And who sort of, did you sort of have a mentor, your previous CEO, who sort of maybe gave you some tips on how to maybe make this work?
Um, no, I think I had some guidance from my board. I called some Stanford classmates. I taught them a little bit. It's it's a world I'm not from, right? So I just really network a lot. There are people who have taken, the thing I the thing I do appreciate though is that I've had a lot of women help me. And so they're like, we like you, we like your spirit. We want to see you, on the cover of X, Y, and Z one day. We want to see you on Oprah one day. I think those types of individuals will try and network for me and help me. But I think really the name game when you're raising money is just, shake trees, follow up with networks, follow up with emails. Don't be afraid because you've earned that right to be at that table.
Yeah. All right. So tell me about, because you talked about at Stanford taking leadership classes and things of that ilk. Tell me about your leadership style and where that derived from, Carrie.
I think a lot of it was from Stanford, and I'm saying that a lot of 90% of success is your human capital, right? Um, my leadership has evolved from that of theoretical, I think that to practical. Where I've been challenged a lot has been on the hiring and firing fronts. Those are very incredibly difficult for me. I've trying to learn how to build a thicker skin. Um, I tend to have a very open door approach, and so that's been a blessing and a curse because everyone knows I'm there. Uh, I try and be fair. I try to be as direct and honest as possible. I'm very feedback driven. Um, and I would say, as of recently, I have loved the fact that there have been books written by women of color in business. I read Indra Nui's. I felt a lot of things very similar to her. One is that, I still go to my parents' house every Sunday. Um, they keep me humble. When I walk through the door, they remind me you're not CEO Carrie, you're our daughter Carrie, and you're gonna clean the dishes and take out the garbage. I would say I'm reading Ursula Burns's right now, and so you read these stories from women of color, and you realize that, like, the only way we've gotten here is through hustle and hard work, right? None of those two women that I just talked about went to Exeter or went to any fancy big school or like anything like that, right? So what those women have reminded me is that, like, you have to really work hard, you have to persevere, and you just have to be confident in whatever room you're sitting in that you have the right to be there.
Yeah. In terms of sharing sort of tips to young people, especially to young women of color in high school, who may not know where they want to go. They're not exposed to a lot of different career paths. What's your sort of advice to them, Carrie?
From college to here, I don't think I ever thought about what was going to happen in between, right? I would just say, shake every tree. Any opportunity you get to meet someone or hear someone, go do it. You're going to hear plenty of different people. you're not going to find your career on TikTok or Instagram. So I would say, uh, think about what gives you purpose. So if maybe you will, maybe you love TikTok, or maybe you want to be a coder, right? Like what draws you to where you want to be. And I always tell people the only way to really get what you want to figure out what you want is just to ask people, or if someone lends you a hand, take it. Right? Like, don't feel bashful. They're lending you a hand because they are offering you help. So I would say, Adam, I challenge your question a little bit. I would say for young women in college, I think high school is still fairly young, but in college, when they have different companies come speak or whatever, go listen, because you might realize that something that you never thought about or even knew about is something that you want to actually be doing, right? So I would just say those types of things for women who are in college. I would suggest that you do that. Like I didn't with SEO. I never knew what SEO was. I was in a classroom. It was on. God, I'm dating myself. It was on a bulletin board. It was one of those little hanging things, and it was like, are you minority? Do you need a summer internship? Take this, and you took that, and that was it. I mean, just happened as easily as that. Like,
Yeah. Okay.
look for the signs.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you about you're there at SimpleHealth. You're building this company. Do you envision that this is where you're going to stay?
I would like to, Adam. I mean, I'm not done yet, right? That's a goal. That's a dream. That's what I'm fighting for every day. It's only time will tell. And so, but either way, like I do think my calling is likely to work in companies that make a difference in the world, or make a difference at least in our country, because there's a certain inherent pleasure, no matter how bad your day is, that when you read a patient or know you change a life, that it makes it all worth it.
Yeah. So let me ask you one final question, Carrie. And you talked about it a moment ago. Obviously, women of color have come a long way, even in your lifetime, and certainly in my lifetime. Where do you see? Are you optimistic? Are you concerned? How concerned are you about the state of women in America? If you want to expand it to women in the world, women in the workplace, business women, what's sort of your mood about where we're going, Carrie?
I'm optimistic, there's a cadre of people my age are doing cool things. And, like this weekend I was at Essence Fest, and talk about a beautiful crowd of brown and black people. And I was sitting at a bar at Ritz-Carlton, and I met, with some other friends, and we started talking to this young person, and she's a very senior woman at a very large corporation, right? And you're like, okay, so like I'm just meeting awesome people at SimpleHealth in New Orleans. And so I believe that we finally have a good group of role models. And so one of the reasons I work so hard is I do want to see some little child who sees me somewhere, or hears her mom talk about me or her dad talk about me, who might be of color or disabled, think, like I can do that. Like I never had anyone that looked up at me like I can do. That's what I want to be, right? Like, and so I'm optimistic given how many women of color there are out there working on the hustle right now. I am. What I'm not optimistic on, or I'm a little bit pessimistic on, is like, we can want the want, but it's how many opportunities are really going to be open for us, right? So when I think about raising capital right now, Adam, I find it incredibly, really great and interesting that, like, people of color help other people of color. So like, as women of color, as we start to network, we need to help each other out. And I think that's why I'm optimistic, because I think if we all affect 5-10 people, there becomes a multiplier effect.
Yeah.
And so I tend to be super optimistic.
Okay. And you had talked about Roe v. Wade. How do you see that affecting not just your business, but again, women's choice?
Adam, you have 2 minutes. You want me to answer that one? No, I'm kidding. I actually had an op-ed in Fortune magazine 2 weeks ago, and I talked about the fact that this is not a pro-life or pro-right. This is about really affecting marginalized communities, and I'll double click on that. People of color, disabled people, marginalized communities like transgender, people will always be able to find abortions if they need it, right? But it's like, how safe will it be? And the thing that bugs me most about this whole Roe v. Wade thing is, you hear someone like Clarence Thomas speak, and I'm concerned about the future of where we're going in terms of like, you wake up one morning thinking it's 2022, and you go to bed and I think it's 2022. You wake up one morning, it's like 1972 again, and so again, like, I'm more concerned about the longer term ramifications if this country keeps on going the way it's going right now. And again, like, I don't want to get political, but we have choices and we have to make influence at the polls.
Yes. Well, again, Carrie, thank you so much. I guess I know how busy you are, and I greatly appreciate time. This is the Black Experience for all. If you like what you hear at the Black Experience, please consider clicking on the Join button to support our nonprofit. I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.